the test of patient endurance. Now, I hope you can remember the path we've come so far over the last 2 weeks. The first one was in chapter 4, verse 13 to 17, we heard about wealthy merchants, people who are self-sufficient, people who do very well, and they make plans, and they are presumptuous because they say things such as, tomorrow I will go to that city and I'll spend a week or a month or a year there and I'll sell stuff and then I'll come back. And so James says to us as believers, we should not do that. And then last week we heard about the wicked rich, which are not Christians. And we see that what they do is they gather wealth, they become arrogant, they become self-sufficient, and they are worldly, and they gather wealth for themselves by exploiting the poor. And then as they have so much, the things they've gathered start rusting and getting mold on it and being stolen by thieves. And James says that is actually an indictment against them. It's actually speaking as almost like a judgment against them, that they have stored up wrath for the last day. And today, and obviously we as Christians, the lesson we can learn from that is that we should not be like that, to store up for ourselves treasures here on earth and exploit others. And today we are looking at the oppressed poor, the ones who are the recipients of the mistreatment, maltreatment of the rich. So we can understand that he's speaking here specifically towards the laborers, those who are working for the rich, but we can apply it to ourselves as well, because all of us, or most of us, work in some kind of employment. Some struggle to find employment. Some are working in very difficult circumstances. There's office politics. There is meager pay, long hours, little reward for what we do. Often we have a dictatorial boss. There's always the threat of being retrenched. Unemployment in South Africa, which is extremely high. And then when we look at these people in this specific context, we understand that we are still quite privileged because we still have work, or at least someone in our family has work. But with these people, they were mostly day laborers. They would go to the market square, the marketplace, or the village square early in the morning, and they would stand around there and hope that someone would hire them for the day, just as we see here at the traffic lights, people sitting there hoping that somebody would hire them for the day. These are the poor. The poor are not those who have a car and a house and a meal to eat every day and have some kind of employment. The poor that James has in mind are those who are waiting to be hired. And they only have money for the day if they are hired for the day. And if they get a job for the day, they can eat that day. If they don't get hired that day, they don't eat. And they spend the night hungry. And many of them live in difficult circumstances, not in a proper house. And that's the people that James has in mind, but specifically has the Christian poor in mind. Because notice that he calls them brothers 4 times. In verse 7, he says, be patient then, brothers. In verse 9, don't grumble, brothers. Verse 10, brothers. And so he mentioned these people, the Christian poor. They are specifically the one that he's addressing. They are our brothers. And we, as those who are maybe not poor, not really poor, we can understand what they are going through, and we can apply these principles to our own lives. We also read there that he says, be patient then. The word then connects that passage, the passage that we are looking at this morning, to what went before. how these people are treated by the rich, the wicked rich. In chapter 5, verse 4, we read, "Look, the wages you have failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty." So it's against that background that he says, "Then, brothers, those of you who are poor, be patient." What happens when a worker is hired for the day? He's got no protection. There's no contract. There's no recourse if the one who hired him for the day does not pay him for some or other reason. Say, "Well, I haven't got money, I can't pay you, I'll pay you next week." Or, "You broke something, so I'm going to subtract that cost from what you were supposed to get. And so you won't get paid today." And so this is how the wicked rich acted. And the question is, how do these struggling Christian brothers, how do they keep on trusting in God? How do they keep their faith in God? Does God not see their suffering? How can I as a Christian survive in my workplace when it's a miserable work environment? If I'm working with someone who has a chip on his shoulder, I don't know if you know that saying, if somebody's got a chip on his shoulder, and they make life difficult for you. I remember, and you know, the thing is, we don't always understand what pressure other people are going through. Sometimes we don't think other people are under pressure. I don't think there is a job today, any place of employment that does not have great pressure. I remember years ago, I was working in an engineering company and there was a security guard. And I would sometimes work late at night and I would come out and everybody's gone home. And this man was sitting there by his security booth or in the front, in the foyer. And he was always needy, desperate to talk to me. And he said to me, "My life is so full of pressure. I have immense pressure." And I thought, how much pressure does a security guard have? And I spent often time, a lot of time talking to him, trying to encourage him, to pray with him, and to be some sort of help to this man. And then one day, I left. I was in a hurry, and I said, "Charles, I'm busy. I've got to go home. My wife's at home. My kids are there. I've got to go." And I went. And the next day, there was another man. His name was Yanni. He was working later than I was. And he phoned me, and he said, "You don't know what happened to Charles?" I said, "No." He shot himself. He shot himself in the courtyard. And the point of the story was, I felt terrible. I still to this day feel terrible and think maybe I could have spent more time with this man. Maybe I could have said something different. Maybe I didn't realize that he was suicidal. And maybe everybody who walked just past him and said, "Listen, we've got to go home. We've got our families, we've got our wives, we've got our kids, we've got our business. We haven't got time to talk to you." My friends, this is why we need to understand that there are people, brothers and sisters, that are struggling in life, that are really, they may look like they've got everything under control. You may say, what kind of pressure does this person have? But they do have. And so James gives us 3 illustrations on how to handle pressure ourselves. Maybe we're not poor. Maybe we're not day laborers that wait to be hired at the street corners with a paint roller and a paintbrush in the one hand and standing there hoping that somebody would pick you up and give you a job for the day. And so he gives 3 illustrations, and the first one is the patient farmer. And he's not speaking here about the mega farmer who has got a factory on his farm and a wine cellar and maybe an export business and gets his money in euros or in dollars, or he's not talking about those kinds of farmers. No, he has those in mind who are eking out a living, a precarious existence on the land. They don't have irrigation, they don't have dams, they've got to plant and wait for the Lord to send the rain. And that's where they are. And maybe they have multiple individuals, maybe even families dependent upon them. And so they pray and they wait for the rain. Notice their patience is mentioned 3 times. Be patient then. Verse 8, you too be patient. And so on. He mentions the word patience 3 times. And he says, we must stand unmoved during times of trouble and hardship. We must be confident that Jesus is coming back. And I know it doesn't help us now. What if Jesus comes back in 100 years? That won't help me now. But this is what James is saying. He says the Lord is coming. Twice he mentions the Lord's coming. In verse 7 and in verse 8. He says, because God is coming back. What does he mean? He means that one day there's going to be a day of reckoning. And those who mistreat those who work for them, their workers, those who exploit the poor, one day they will give an account to God. It says there in verse 1 of chapter 5, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming to you. The judgment is coming. And you know the judgment day is good for us if we are believers. Because what will happen on that day? Will I be happy because God judges the wicked? No. We will be happy because our suffering and our fears will come to an end. You see, my friend, the farmer sits on the land, and the land is valuable when it rains. If it doesn't rain, you can't do anything. Nothing will grow. So the richness is in the soil. And you can plant, you can even send livestock onto the land, but if it does not rain, there's nothing you can do. And only the Lord can send the rain. No one else can. And just so in our lives, when we are sitting on the land of our lives and we experience things as we sung in this hymn, we are experiencing the frustration of going through this dry and weary and desert land. God will be with us and He will send the rain. He is the one who will make things right in the end. He is the judge. Our work is not to rile and start a revolution and to fight against those who oppress us. That is not what we do. We call out to the Lord. Notice there in verse 4, he says, the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. That's the one that we bring our petitions and our requests and our fears to, is the Lord Almighty. We cry out to Him. Say, Lord, you see what I'm going through. You see how these people treat me. You know that I don't have enough to eat. You don't know that I don't have a job. And we should not groan or grumble against other Christians. When we are crushed in spirit, we need to cry out to the Lord, because the Lord is the judge. He is the one who can see all reality which we cannot see, and He is the one that will make things right. The next example he uses is that of the long-suffering prophet. Notice in verse 10 he says, brothers, as an example of patience, and here patience is mentioned the 4th time, in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. You know, it's so ironic. We have here in Brackenfell, everywhere in Cape Town, we have people that are prophets and apostles. You know that. Prophet so-and-so is going to speak in Brackenfell. And prophet so-and-so is going to do this. He's going to have a night of deliverance, night of miracles. You know what the job description of a prophet was in the Old Testament? Come, I've got a message for you, for the people. No one will listen to you and they'll kill you in the end. That was the message of the prophet. That was the job description for the prophet. Nobody wanted to be a prophet because it was a dangerous job with great fatality rate. That's why Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh. Can you imagine? They're these Assyrians. They hate Israel. They are big, strong guys, bloodthirsty people. And he's going to stand in the middle of their capital city and tell them that God is going to judge this city. 40 days and God's going to destroy the city. Can you imagine Jonah looking forward to this assignment? He rather ran away. And then there was Jeremiah. He was called the weeping prophet. God called him when he was a young boy. He said, Lord, I'm a boy. I think you've got the wrong person. I'm only a youth. The Lord said, don't say you're a youth. You go. And you know what the Lord told him? Your ministry is going to fail. Before he went, your ministry is going to fail. Nobody's going to listen to you. They threw him in a well, in a cistern. They put him in stocks. They called him a traitor because he said to them, you know, the Babylonians are coming and you can't resist them because it's the Lord's doing. So they thought he was a national traitor. He was thrown in prison. And the Lord, what did the Lord give him? To make him stand? The Lord said, I'm going to make you like a bronze wall. Whatever they throw against you, you will stand. And if you want to know what was going through his mind, just read Lamentations 3. And you'll see how Jeremiah felt. It wasn't like, oh, well, this is a nice job. I love being a prophet of the Lord. Just read Lamentations, especially chapter 3. And the same with Isaiah. Isaiah was called in the temple. He was given a commission. And you know what his commission was? Go into the land until the whole land lies ruined. No one will listen because I will stop their ears. No one will see because I will make them blind. No one will turn because I will make their hearts hard. That's what the Lord said. Isaiah, that's your commission. Go. And he went. Many of these prophets died martyrs' deaths. Jeremiah was stoned to death. At the end of all of this, and after being captured and taken to Egypt and brought back with his enemies, eventually, after all his resilience and long suffering, he was stoned to death. Isaiah, tradition tells us, was sawn in two. We obviously don't know if that is true, but we have this verse in Hebrews that tells us they were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were put to death by the sword. That's what the writer to the Hebrews mentions. And Zechariah, one of my favorite prophets, the most favorite prophet of mine, he was stoned to death in the temple, between the courtyard and the altar. They stoned him to death. That man who built the temple, in that very temple that he was instrumental in building, yet there he was stoned to death. And people today call themselves prophets? Well, I don't think so. Notice what Jesus says about the prophets. He says, I'm sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. How often have I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you're not willing. And the man who wrote this letter, do you know how he ended? He was thrown from the roof of the temple in Jerusalem. And when they rushed down to see if he was dead, they found he was still alive and they clubbed him to death. That's what happened to James, the brother of Jesus. So my friends, I think obviously James didn't know that was going to happen to him. But I think the message is clear. Life is hard. And if you're a Christian, your life is especially hard. Because you experience all the pressures and the pain and the suffering that normal non-believers experience, plus they hate you because you belong to Christ. And James says, be like the prophets. Be like the prophets. They are example to us. They spoke in the name of the Lord and nobody loved them. Nobody liked them. And then he gives another I just want to add that when you face persecution for the sake that you are a Christian, that it means simply that you are right with God. The third example he uses is that of the perseverance of Job. Notice in verse 11, he says, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance. Twice we hear of Job's perseverance. People speak of Job's patience. He was not a patient man. Not at all. Some of my favorite quotes come from Job. And I've actually thought of using some of these quotes at ecclesiastical gatherings, but it won't go down well. One of the things he said to his friends, doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. I don't know if you understand what he's saying. You are so wise. You are the people. You have all the answers, and when you die, wisdom is going to die with you. That's how he thought about them. He says to them, you smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. Worthless physicians. And then, last one, miserable comforters, you all. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you that you keep on arguing? I could also speak like you if you were in my place. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head against you. So that's how Job saw things with his friends. So he was definitely not a patient man, but he persevered. He lost everything. He lost his children. He lost his wealth. He lost his health. He lost his reputation because his friends and the people in town thought that he must have done something wrong, because that's why God was blasting him this way. And so they mocked him. Even the worthless people we read in town, the leegleers, those guys who were just lying around, they mocked him. They thought he was a evil man. Even his own wife turned against him. She said to him, how long will you keep this up? How long are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. That's good advice from a spouse. The worst thing was for Job was not all of this. This was a minor. These were minor details. What he didn't understand is why this was happening to him. He knew it wasn't because of sin. He knew it wasn't because of something he had done. There's in Job chapter, I think 30 or 31, there's a whole long speech that Job states, where Job states his innocence and how he's treated people. And he's always treated others with great care and integrity. And so he couldn't understand this, and he kept on saying to God, but I'm innocent. He's saying that to his friends. And he said to the Lord, even though you slay me, yet will I praise you. Oh God, even if you kill me, if you make my life miserable, I will yet praise you. And in all of that, he clung to the Lord. The worse it got, the harder he clung to the Lord. And I think my favorite quote in the whole of Job is in Job 16, verse 18 to 21. He says, O earth, do not cover my blood. May my cry never be laid to rest. May my blood cry out from the earth. Even if I'm dead and gone, may God hear my cry. Even now, but then he says, even now, at this miserable time of my life, I know that my witness is in heaven. My advocate is on high. My intercessor, the one in heaven who intercedes for me, is my friend. As I pour out my tears to God, on behalf of a man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. So even in the midst of this, Job knew there was someone in heaven, his intercessor, his advocate, who would plead for him. He didn't know what was going on there, but that's what he believed. And in the end, the Lord answered. And we know that at the end of his life, the Lord returned his wealth, his health, his integrity. I don't know what happened to his wife. My friends, what is the Christian response? Must we be presumptuous and say, tomorrow I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that? Or are we self-sufficient and exploiting others? Or are we in the group? Well, we could be in all three groups, but the main thing is, what we need to understand is, if we face oppression and hardship and suffering in life, we have these three examples for us: the patient farmer, the long-suffering prophet, and the perseverant Job. And James says, don't fight back. Bring your request to the Lord. Cry out to the Lord. Let the Lord deal with the people. Let the Lord deal with the oppressor, with the wicked rich, with the landowner, with the employer. That's not our department. Our problem, and this is what Job understood, my problem, and this is what Jeremiah also understood, my problem is with God. I've got to call out to God. Say, Lord, help me, save me. And James tells us to stand firm, even in trying circumstances, because we have an advocate in heaven. Our intercessor is our friend. He does see our need, and he will keep on interceding for us until the day that we leave planet Earth, or until Jesus returns. And on that day, everything will become new. Amen.